Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping. I'm Chloe James, and along with my co-host Charles Green, I'm delighted to welcome...
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this week I'm delighted to welcome Rupert Lee-Browne. Rupert is the founder and CEO of Caxton, an award-winning payments company that has grown to the 1 billion turnover mark that it now has today. He's been leading it for over 23 years and bootstrapping it, and is still expanding and scaling. Caxton is one of the few fintechs to reach profitability, and certainly one of the only ones that I've ever come across that has been bootstrapped. So looking forward to hearing all your thoughts and advice. So welcome to the show, Rupert, and thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks very much, Charles. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you. So let's get right in. Obviously, lots of people are considering starting a business and founding a business. But in tech, and especially in the fintech world, all you hear about and all you read about is VC funding and seed funding, despite the data that shows that bootstrapping often produces a better outcome. So why should founders, and especially tech and fintech founders, consider bootstrapping, and what are some of the advantages in your experience?
For sure. Well, I think that it's definitely a misunderstanding that you need to raise money in order to start a business, and I think that Caxton is living proof of that. It's there has grown up a culture in the last 10, 15 years that basically determines that a technical business and particularly fintechs need to raise lots of money in order to succeed. But what you don't kind of hear are the stories of the successes for those that haven't raised money from VCs. And so if we look at why you would want to bootstrap in the first place, it isn't necessarily because you can't raise money. It's because you don't necessarily want to. The benefits of not raising money from external parties are certainly long term, but they are varied and many. Let's put it that way. Predominantly, it's about control, and when you first start a business, control is not a significant issue, but as it grows and as it hopefully succeeds, so control is a massive issue. And if you have external shareholders who are very good at what they do, I mean, their job is basically to invest in businesses, and they do this all the time. They will necessarily want to have control over what the business is doing, but for entrepreneurs, this is just fundamentally wrong, because entrepreneurs are the ones with the ideas. They're the ones who are actually making it work. So to have someone else who's not in the business doing the business, controlling what's going on, that's just bad for that's bad for the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs, and it's certainly bad for the business. That would be my view. So I think it's really important that anybody wanting to start a business should consider not raising money. If we come back to the reasons as to why I bootstrapped Caxton in the first place, it started, as you might imagine, before Caxton. I'd started a .com in 1998, 99, and we were venture backed, and let's say I didn't enjoy the experience of having external investors. Things were imposed on me in the business that was very, very uncomfortable. And as a consequence, I actually got out of the business with my shirt intact. But fundamentally, it was not a very nice ride. And I swore blind that the next business that I started, I would not seek at least VC money. So that was kind of why, that was one of the reasons why I chose to bootstrap Caxton.
Yeah, and it is all to do with, as you say, control, but it's also the decision making, the timeline. I mean, because VCs, seed funders, all investors, they have a job to do, which they're very good at, which is to invest, and then within a 3 or 5 year window, exit, and to make sure that when they do, they have maximized their investments. irrespective of what the founder might be trying to do or new and interesting directions the founder might be wanting to go. And then so you're straight away on someone else's timeline. You don't have control. You have to go for decisions to, to boards and to investors. Is this okay? They will just look at things through a financial lens. And quite often it's those poking around in corners where you don't think there's much of an opportunity, but as a bootstrapper, you're poking around in corners at the start that you find those little nuggets that grow. So just coming back to poking around in corners at the start. So when you started Caxton's, did you have okay, this is exactly what the product needs to be, or did you have an idea and then you kind of went and spoke to a few clients? And one of the things I find with founders is they often end up slightly to the left or right of what they originally thought the product needed to be after they've had a bit more conversations with prospects.
I did know exactly what I was trying to do
Okay.
from the start and achieved it. And even before I started, I made everything work, even down to the processes and the systems, the filing system that I was going to be using. I mean, all the technology behind it, I'd actually kind of worked out exactly what we wanted it to be. So when I started back in 2001, there were only 5 companies in our market that did what we did. There are now several thousand, so it's been a
Grown quite a bit.
very interesting journey. But there were very few, and I had spent a little bit of time working with one of them, which I helped do an IPO with, and so I knew the market to a certain extent. It was freshly emerging, and what we started out doing was just international payments for private clients.
Yeah.
There was a big boom at the time, or there was starting to be a boom on people buying houses overseas, and we kind of rode that particular wave. So we had an advantage in that we had very few competitors, and that the market was growing. So from day one, we had clients, as it were, and we had revenues and we had cash flow. But I knew exactly what the market was that I was aiming for and what I was trying to achieve, which was basically providing a wonderful service. If anyone can remember that far back, it was a rare, wretched nightmare to send money to an overseas account. You had to go into a bank branch and fill out lots of forms and suffer the indignity of being questioned and pushed and prodded by the by the lady or man behind the counter, and it took forever, and it was a fairly unsatisfactory experience. And what I wanted to do was to basically create a fantastic service-led, technology-backed foreign exchange and international payments business. And the market I knew were reasonably that our clients are reasonably upscale, and reasonably savvy in what they were doing. So they wanted value and service at the same time.
So you basically, I mean, and we talk about this a lot, you looked at something where there was a really poor experience for the customers and went, what, everyone working in that space kind of sucks. I think we can do something a lot better. We can execute and provide a really, really great customer service. You mentioned cash flow. I'll come back to that in a second. But when you start, obviously, as a founder, and there's lots of things you can get, especially these days from Gen AI and digital and stuff, where 25 years ago you needed human beings to kind of fulfill these roles. But there are certain core functions, kind of sales, finance, and when I say finance, I mean actually driving a P&L, not necessarily creating the P&L in the first place. A CTO, what are the things that you can afford to outsource, and what are the things where you kind of like, no, that needs to be someone on board who can do that. And if it's not your skill set as a founder, you need to get someone who can do that. What are the ones that you daren't outsource, in your opinion?
So there are 2 roles in particular that are core to a business success, and as early as you can, you hire the best you can. So the first one is your CFO, so your finance director, because this is the guy that actually keeps the business going. This is the person who absolutely understands every single aspect of your business, or should do. So it's vital that your CFO knows what they're doing. And as you discover over the years, you get good CFOs or finance directors, and you get not such good CFOs and
Yes,
finance.
I've experienced the highs and lows of that, and it's the lesson well learned.
It is, and I mean the great thing about my position now, as the same chief executive sort of that I was when I started the business, is I've got to ride that roller coaster of good and not so good people across the board, and it's been a real pleasure actually to see how it all works and really to be able to recognize good when you see it. I'm not entirely sure that I fully understood good when I first started Caxton, but there we go. So your CFO is absolutely key, and get a good one get one as soon as you possibly can. You can get fractional CFOs, which are fine, and actually what you can do is to get a really top grade CFO on a fractional basis, particularly when you're starting, which is a solution for a lot of small businesses. And the second person that is absolutely key in your business, particularly if it's a technology one, is your CTO. That relationship between the CEO and the CTO is absolutely crucial. So understanding each other and what you're both trying to achieve is more important than almost anything else. That relationship, trying to find the CTO that works for you. Don't expect necessarily to find the first person, the best person first time round, but you need to understand each other extraordinarily well. You need to understand what that CTO is doing and how he goes about things, how he structures things, how he architects his team, his view on all sorts of things like, whether or not you do in-house or out-house, whether you use contractors in-house, how where you place people, the technologies that CTO wants to use, whether or not they're on the ascendance or whether or not they are they're going to be sunset in X number of years. I mean, all of these things, all of these decisions are crucial to the success of the business. And it is so easy to get technology wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the most simple things to do is to completely and utterly mess up by buying or building the wrong thing. Time after time, I hear entrepreneurs and CEOs complaining about how the technology hasn't been delivered on time, or in a working fashion, or it's gone over budget. I mean, it's time after time. So this is why your CTO is so important, and understanding the way that they intend to go about things is crucial.
Yeah, so those are the kind of top hires, but when you're first starting, you're on limited funds, and you're trying to build a culture. So when you and everyone struggles with what exactly am I looking for and how do I recognize it? And it's very much trial and error at start. But what are you hiring for? Adaptability? Are you hiring for a positive attitude? Are you hiring for experience? Are you hiring for all three? What are the kind of general things you're looking for at the start? And then following on from that, what were you kind of deliberately doing to try and to build a culture? How are you sort of like how are you trying to like grow the culture that you wanted? Because you said before you started you had everything, the tech, the people you're going to work with, etc. So did you have a strong idea about the culture at the start as well?
Well, let's go back 23 years. Technology, fintech technology, and entrepreneurs were not cool things.
No, they weren't. It was not
They
glamorized at all then. It was you were regarded slightly bizarrely as more of a curiosity if you left your job to start a business.
Exactly. I mean, both my parents and my dear departed mother-in-law still, I mean, they wondered when I was actually going to get a proper job. And so the whole thing about selecting the right people nobody wanted to come and work for a small business that had only 2 or 3 people in it. Nobody did. It was not a cool thing to go and work for a startup at all. And I absolutely understood that. Why would you? Why would you go and work for somebody or for a business that that doesn't pay as well as a large company, where you have to work twice as hard and the rewards probably aren't going to be there? That was back then. And back then, we basically had to get anybody and everybody who would come and work for us to come and work for us. And I'm not entirely sure that choice was on our side. Let's put it that way. But over the years, you get to understand exactly what works in what particular roles, and the nature and type of person that you want to employ. I mean, I think that for me, the real revelation on culture came reasonably recently, actually. With the pandemic, we were forced as a business to become a hybrid working environment. And what that did was enable us to hire some brilliant people who we would not necessarily have hired before. Those people who have to look after children on a daily basis,
Yeah.
Actually are remarkably well organized and very hardworking. But that doesn't necessarily work in a standard office environment. So we're really proud of the culture that we've built up, where we absolutely recognize brilliance in whatever guise it may come. So we as a business have a very diverse group of people who work for us. In each way, they are all brilliant. But I wouldn't dream of, for example, asking someone in the sales team to work in the compliance function. They're just not made that way.
I wouldn't disagree, but I mean, obviously, I was starting RFI, my last business, around the same time as you, where you can't afford to pay people what they want, and it's very much okay. Well, we can't get people with experience, and we can't get people who've already got jobs, so we're going to have to get people who, for some reason or other, maybe they've got something to prove, or they've not had the chances or the opportunities, but they're willing to work hard. But you can create, if you're successful and you grow quickly, you can create a kind of exciting culture where people are like, okay, I'm not going to cost me as much money, and I have to work very hard, and there isn't a guaranteed outcome, but it looks kind of fun. Like, whereas what I'm doing now looks kind of is a bit boring. That looks really, really fun and crazy and a little bit hectic over there. And some people move into that and thrive and love it, and other people don't thrive so much. But you spoke about the pandemic and moving to hybrid working and remote working and everything. So how do you build a culture? And I would argue at the start, it's particularly in the early days, it's really important that the key people are in the same space, because that enables the business to have the best possible chance of starting, as opposed to potentially acting as a block. But once you start to grow and you get more and more people, how do you maintain that culture when people are hybrid, people are remote? What are some of the sort of strategies you had in place to make sure that the new people joining in the middle of the pandemic were equally engaged and bought into the culture as people who've been there for 10 or 15 years?
Yeah, and that's complicated. But above anything else, it's over communication. So the more you can communicate with people about what's going on, the more they will appreciate it. What I think I've found is that is keeping people in the dark is not a good idea. So you need to be completely transparent. Well, not necessarily completely transparent, but you need to be open and honest about situations, good and bad. I mean, over the last 23 years, as you might expect, we've had some good times and we've had some bad times. And being brutally honest with people about their about the situation that they or the company or their department might be in is imperative. So over communication. I mean, during the pandemic, we started having daily meetings with everybody in the business, and we still continue to do so. We over communicate on where we are on the strategy, on the finances, and on how well each division or department is doing. That over communication, I think, is important, whether or not you are hybrid, remote, or indeed face to face. Funnily enough, when you're all in an office together, sometimes things are remarkably misunderstood. But what we as a business have now found is that doing that, the collaboration piece, we need to see people face to face in order to have meetings with them wherever possible. So we lay down certain ground rules around the remote working piece. We ask people to come in rather than telling them, but we ask them to come in for a certain number of days in a week, and that if there are a certain number of people in a meeting, then it should be done face to face, rather than otherwise. And we just ensure that collaboration piece is done face to face wherever possible. We're as I said, a very diverse group of people, but it works when everyone understands what they're working for, why they're doing things, what the end goal might be, and that might be an end goal in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, and in a decade. On the cultural piece, one of the things that we do is to ensure that we emphasize the flat structure that we have. When somebody starts, when you've got a new starter, the first people they meet are the C-suite. So that's our CFO, our Chief People Officer, me, the CEO, and the Chief Revenue Officer, and our COO. So they get to understand from their first day exactly what's what the ethos of the business is, and that they can talk to any of the C-suite without fear of quaking in their boots. And on as I kind of talk to new team members, I talk about their first day, i.e. that day, but I also talk about their last day. And I explain to them that it's a likelihood that they will have a last day at Caxton. However, what we want to do is to understand, is to make sure that between their first and their last day, that they've grown as an individual, that they've learned things, that they've taken away a whole load of experiences onto their next job, and that they go onto a better job. We genuinely want people to go onto a better job when they leave us. So it's things like that, it's little touches like that that enable new team members to understand what the culture is, and what they need to be doing as part of that culture.
I love that last day. It's so important, especially when you're asking people to come into a business wherever you are in your bootstrapping journey. If you're growing quickly, the pressure is on. You're going to work long hours. You're gonna be under stress. You're going to sacrifice, time spent with loved ones, with friends, social time, etc. But if people can see from day one the benefit to them as an individual by putting the time in, then that works both ways. It drives them, and it gets a better outcome for the business as well. I just want to come back to something you said about the ups and the downs. It is a roller coaster ride. There are big there are big up moments. There are also some kind of some down moments, and frankly, as I'm sure you've had over 20 years, you get these existential moments. Both of us got confronted with the financial crisis and the pandemic, which were both externally created crises, but I'm sure, like me, you've had many internal crises that are somewhat self-created. So when these particularly challenging moments happen, what are some of the tools that you think of how you get through, and what are sort of, if you've got any out of the box kind of like anecdotes about, of how to deal with some of these challenging moments, be they internal or externally created?
So as you might expect, over the last 23 years, we've had our challenges and we've had our successes. And in terms of how you deal with the challenges, it obviously depends on how severe they are. The most important thing with business difficulties is that the business keeps going in whatever shape or format. So if the business is close to, if there's been some financial disaster, or if the business is close to closing, the most important thing you got to understand is to keep that business going, because once it goes, it goes, and it has no chance of recovery. So you can take things back to absolutely the last person standing, but the business needs to keep going in order that it can then hopefully recover and rehire those people that maybe it's had to let go. So be rapid, be brutal, but at the same time, I think it's vital to ensure that the business in its purest format continues to operate. So that's when you got challenges. I mean, from Caxton's perspective, the global financial crisis was interesting, but we continued to grow, and that was fine. And the recent pandemic had a much greater impact. A large amount of our revenues came from travel, so as you might imagine, those revenues fell off a cliff. But we did all the things. We pulled the levers that we needed to. So we cut costs. We cut costs dramatically. We looked at other revenue sources. We looked down the back of the sofa to see what if any cash there was sort of hiding in little crevices, and that kept us thriving, really.
Yeah, it's interesting what you find. I mean, like you, the financial crisis was, you dare almost say it even 20 years later, but it was a relative boon for us, because it enabled us to work out the data product for banks that would enable us to scale. And then the pandemic, whilst it wasn't brilliant for anyone from a business point of view, we were a data business, and data became more and more valuable during the pandemic. But when you do get these challenges and you look at your cost base, you find yourself looking at the most curious things, going, at what point did we decide to have horticulture coming, in all of our offices globally at this enormous cost? When was that decision made, and how have we not noticed that?
Yeah.
Because that's an extra 30,000 we've got sitting there that, it gets really quite illuminating when you have those situations. But that's talking about when things go wrong. What I always find interesting is no one ever really understands the challenges when things are going right. Like, it's a nice problem to have. Well, it might be a nice problem to have, but it's still a problem. So as you're growing and scaling globally, and things are going really things are going really well from a revenue and a growth perspective, what are some of the challenges of scaling? And how do you start thinking about that in a manner that allows you to kind of sidestep some of the more obvious pitfalls?
Yeah. There is a tendency for everybody to demand a fast growth business, and this tends to come, funnily enough, from the investors who want to see a return on their money as quickly as possible. There's nothing to say that you can't grow a business slowly, and if anything, what you'll find is the integrity of that business and the strength of that business is much greater. But I think growing growing a business, it is complicated to know how to allocate resources rapidly, so that they are best utilized, and how you can absolutely maintain your cash flow, because particularly if you've got a sales cycle that's long, how you maintain your sales team and all of your administration team behind it, and your tech team, how do you maintain the strength of that, the strength of those teams, whilst you're waiting for the money to come in? Now, this could be where the need for extra funding comes in, and there's always a case, there's always an argument for bringing more money into the business. It just not necessarily on an equity basis at an early stage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's something that I think everyone that we've interviewed on this podcast has bootstrapped for a number of years, 10 years, 15 years, but at some point has gone, trying to grow whilst maintaining cash flow only works to a certain size. And at that point, the stress on the cash flow, however well constructed the cash flow model is, becomes so acute and intense that actually looking at alternative sources of funding, be it debt finance, hybrid debt, equity, there's lots of alternatives to the more standard. Okay, we better go and talk to some growth investors now and give up some equity. But yeah, but absolutely. You mentioned cash flow a few times, and obviously cash is king. So when you first started, were you really super conscious about how do we set the model up so it's cash flow positive, to enable us to use that cash to grow? Or is that something that's sort of developed over time as you got the business up and running? And what are some of the things that would-be founders or people running bootstrapping businesses now can kind of like focus on to try and other than having a fantastic CFO, then but perhaps before you get to that, to kind of like make sure their cash flow is helping them, not hindering them.
Yeah. So again, this is an advantage of bootstrapping, is that you don't have many resources, and therefore your costs are considerably lower than if you were given a large investment up front. In our case, it was just me, and I didn't need a lot of money at that stage. So the business model also for Caxton in those days was very straightforward and afforded positive cash flow from day one. And by the end of month one, we were profitable. So, and that profit went back into building the balance sheet. I was obsessed with building the balance sheet in the early years. The difficulty, as you say, Charles, is when you need to grow a little bit further and you're doing fine, but you suddenly realize that actually you haven't got the cash on the balance sheet to actually to invest. In our instance, I mean, obviously there are a large variety of funding options now, but back then, 15, 20 years ago, there were fewer options. The first thing I did was to go and talk to our bankers, with whom we had a very good relationship. And I said, look, we're looking to grow, and it's fairly straightforward. I just need to borrow a bit of money in order to ensure that we've got sufficient working capital behind what we're doing. And the first question they asked was, so Rupert, what's your house worth?
As they always do.
As they always do. And I thought, well, the very, very, very last thing I'm ever going to do is to put my house up as collateral for my business. That can be an awfully slippery slope.
Yeah.
So I looked about for alternatives, and at the time I was talking to some other friends who were bankers, and they talked about how they'd issued some bonds, and I was just sort of slightly curious as to why we couldn't issue some bonds. So I talked to a lawyer and worked out actually that we could issue debt to our customers, which is in the form of bonds, which is exactly what we did. So in 2010, we issued, they were actually, I think, the second bonds that had been done. There was another business that had done it before us, but fundamentally, we raised debt from our customers.
Like an early form of crowdfunding.
An early form of crowdfunding, exactly. And from our perspective, and from the bondholders' perspective, it was phenomenally successful. You know, they got a nice coupon, and we got some working capital.
Fantastic. See, you mentioned at the start, obviously it was just yourself, and you were really you were looking at what was happening with international exchange and people buying houses and thinking that is an experience that is incredibly painful, and I can use the technology-based, customer service-based approach to make it a fantastic experience. So we've talked about the technology a bit. The customer service side, and obviously bootstrappers in particular, I think there is so much more of a focus on providing an exemplary, best-in-class customer service, because that creates a renewal book, which creates a balance sheet, a cost base that you can use to fund and grow, as opposed to investor-led models where it's all about go out, winning new logos, expanding as rapidly as possible, which is potentially disastrous when you're bootstrapping. It's very easy to deliver fantastic customer service when it's a team of one. It's Rupert. As you grow, firstly, you see how are some of the ways you did that, and then secondly, as you grow, how do you make sure that customer first ethos, that exemplary, best in class customer service permeates the entire culture across the business, not just from a sales and a client interaction point of view, but the finance team, the product team, the tech team, everybody is focused on customer service.
Yeah. So it starts, obviously, as you might imagine, with individuals. So with every new individual you bring on, you need to tell them the stories of why we do things. You need to tell them stories as to why we treat customers the way that we treat them, rather than with contempt. And as each new individual starts, they learn the culture of service for our customers, which then leads to us being paid. Time and time again, I just repeat again and again, this is treating our customers well is what makes us money. And if we fail to do that, then customers will go. And as you might imagine, over years, our customer service has won awards, and then at times, it's slipped. There are times when we failed our customers, but when it comes down to really fantastic customer service, it's knowing that you can make changes for those customers. When things go wrong, things go wrong. But you are in a position to make change. So we had a lovely client who was buying a house, or buying property next to his house in France, and he was very organized. He did everything right, got the funds to us at the right time. We sent the money to the right place, but the right place then lost his money. And as he got closer to the completion date, so he was getting more and more irate, as you might imagine, and he blamed us, which I fully understood. Anyway, the day before his completion date, we understood where the money was, and it was coming back to us, which was kind of slightly less than useless for him. So I phoned him up and I said, I will meet you tomorrow morning at Carcassonne Airport, and I will bring you a banker's draft in euros. So I hopped on a Ryanair flight first thing. I think it's the only Ryanair flight I've ever taken. Talking of customer service, and I presented him with a check, and so for us it was really straightforward for us to do. There was a problem that could be resolved, and it was resolved by somebody jumping on a plane. It's that sort of customer service that we again reiterate internally, that you don't necessarily need to jump on a plane, but we do need to fix the problems that occur, that then ensure that the customer has faith in what we're doing.
That's a fantastic story. The founder who jumps on a plane to personally deliver the product to ensure an amazing customer experience for the customer. That's brilliant. Fantastic. Rupert, thank you very much for your time. We're out of time as usual. We could chat forever, swapping war stories. But it's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on Bootstrap Confidential and for sharing all your expert thoughts and advice, and of building a fintech by bootstrapping, which is very rarely done, and is showing the possibilities of bootstrapping a tech business to $1 billion in revenue, and the lessons you've learned along the way. So thank you very much for your time.
No, it's been great. Thank you very much, Charles.
Brilliant. To all our listeners, if you've got any questions for Rupert or myself, or there's anything else you'd like to hear about, then please just message us via LinkedIn or via the website, and we look forward to all your thoughts and responses. For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.